There is something unsettling about realizing that most of what drives human behavior happens beneath the surface. We like to believe we are rational, that we choose our actions consciously, that other people mean what they say. But if you watch carefully, in business meetings, in relationships, in politics, even in your own quiet thoughts, you begin to see patterns that don't quite match the stories people tell about themselves. The truth is, human nature operates according to deep, predictable forces. And once you begin to understand these forces, the world feels less confusing, less personal, and far more navigable. Every person you encounter is shaped by hidden desires, insecurities, fears, and ambitions. These forces are often invisible even to the individual experiencing them. We are all, to some degree, strangers to ourselves. We assume our intentions are clear and pure, yet our behavior frequently contradicts them. We say we want growth but avoid discomfort. We claim we value honesty but hide inconvenient truths. We speak about fairness but secretly crave advantage. This gap between what we think we are and what we truly are is the starting point. Most conflict, disappointment, and betrayal arise not because people are uniquely evil, but because we misunderstand the basic structure of human psychology. We project our own mindset onto others. We assume consistency where there is none. We take things personally that were never about us in the first place. At the center of human nature lies emotion. Despite how much we praise logic, emotion drives nearly every decision. It shapes our judgments before reason even enters the picture. We feel first, and then we rationalize. This is not a flaw in some people, it is a universal condition. The problem arises when we remain unaware of it. Think about how quickly moods spread in a group. One anxious leader can infect an entire team. One confident individual can lift the energy of a room. Emotions are contagious. They move invisibly from person to person, influencing decisions and behaviors without anyone acknowledging their source. This emotional undercurrent often matters more than facts or arguments. And yet, because we like to see ourselves as rational beings, we ignore this reality. We overestimate how objective we are. We believe we're making clear-headed decisions when we're often reacting to subtle emotional triggers, envy, insecurity, pride, fear of rejection, desire for approval. This is where self-awareness becomes rare and powerful. Most people spend their lives reacting. Very few step back and examine their emotional patterns. When you begin observing your own triggers, the situations that make you defensive, the comments that sting more than they should, the moments where you feel an urge to prove yourself, you start uncovering the deeper layers shaping your behavior. Often, these patterns are rooted in early experiences. Childhood dynamics quietly shape adult reactions. A person who grew up feeling overlooked may become overly sensitive to recognition. Someone who experienced instability may crave excessive control. These tendencies become part of personality, and because they develop so early, they feel natural, almost inevitable. But they are not inevitable. They are patterns. And patterns can be observed. When you fail to observe them, they control you. When you observe them, you gain distance. That distance creates choice. The same principle applies to others. Once you recognize that people operate from their own emotional histories and insecurities, their behavior becomes easier to interpret. The colleague who constantly criticizes may not be attacking you, they may be masking deep self-doubt. The friend who boasts endlessly may be struggling with internal inadequacy. The partner who withdraws may fear vulnerability more than they admit. This doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. It means you understand it strategically rather than react emotionally. Another crucial aspect of human nature is our tendency toward self-absorption. We live inside our own heads. Our desires, fears, and narratives feel central. But so does everyone else's. When two people interact, each assumes they are the main character. Misunderstandings are almost guaranteed. This self-centered perspective leads to overinterpretation. If someone doesn't respond to your message, you assume it's about you. If someone looks distracted, you imagine disapproval. But most of the time, others are simply consumed by their own concerns. Recognizing this reduces unnecessary suffering. It allows you to detach from imagined slights and see interactions more objectively. Then there is the constant tension between our higher and lower selves. We like to identify with our ideals, the disciplined, generous, rational version of ourselves. But beneath that lies a more impulsive side driven by immediate gratification, ego, and emotion. This tension is ongoing. It never disappears. Maturity does not mean eliminating the lower impulses. It means acknowledging them without being controlled by them. When someone criticizes you, the immediate impulse may be defensiveness. When someone succeeds, you may feel envy. When someone challenges your authority, you may feel anger. These reactions are human. Pretending they don't exist only pushes them underground, where they influence behavior indirectly. The more honest you are about your darker impulses, the less power they hold. You can notice envy without acting on it. You can feel anger without escalating conflict. Awareness interrupts automatic reaction. Many people resist this level of self-examination because it threatens their identity. It's easier to blame circumstances or other people, but that resistance is itself part of human nature. The ego's need to maintain a flattering self-image. The ego wants certainty, superiority, validation. It dislikes ambiguity and criticism. It creates narratives that protect self-esteem. It distorts memory to preserve pride. And when challenged, it fights back. You can see this dynamic everywhere. In corporate politics, leaders surround themselves with those who affirm them. In relationships, people reinterpret past events to avoid admitting fault. In public discourse, individuals defend opinions not because they are accurate, but because changing them feels like losing status. Understanding this gives you an advantage. You stop expecting pure rationality from others. You stop being shocked by defensiveness. You anticipate it. And when you anticipate it, you can navigate it calmly. Perhaps the most liberating realization is that these tendencies are universal. You are not uniquely flawed. Others are not uniquely irrational. We are all operating within the same psychological structure. When you internalize this, you become less judgmental and more strategic. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" you begin asking, "What emotional need might be driving this?" That shift alone transforms interactions. But recognizing emotional forces is only the beginning. There are deeper patterns, destructive tendencies, unconscious roles we play, subtle manipulations we both use and fall victim to. There are types of personalities that consistently create chaos. There are ways in which envy, narcissism, and aggression quietly shape social dynamics. Once you start noticing these patterns, you realize how predictable behavior can be. And predictability means power, not power over others in a crude sense, but power over your own responses. The real challenge is not observing others. It is observing yourself without illusion. That requires courage. It requires resisting the comforting stories you tell about your motives. It requires seeing how often you seek validation, how easily you compare yourself, how quickly you assume intent. But the reward is clarity. And clarity changes everything. As you begin peeling back these layers, you'll notice certain patterns repeat across different areas of life, in friendships, workplaces, families, romantic relationships. There are specific laws governing these dynamics, and understanding them allows you to move through life with greater awareness and control. And once you start recognizing these deeper currents beneath everyday interactions, you'll begin to see just how much of human behavior follows invisible rules that most people never consciously examine. The next step is to explore one of the most powerful and dangerous of these forces, the illusions we hold about ourselves, and how they quietly shape every decision we make. If you look closely at the decisions you regret most, you'll notice something uncomfortable. In the moment, you were certain. Certain you were right. Certain your interpretation was accurate. Certain your reaction was justified. Only later, with distance, does the distortion become obvious. That distortion is not accidental. It is built into the way the human mind protects itself. We all carry an internal image of who we believe we are. It is polished, edited, and carefully arranged. In this image, we are generally reasonable, capable, and well-intentioned. We may admit small flaws, but only the ones that do not threaten the overall picture. This self-image acts like armor. It shields us from the pain of doubt and insecurity, but it also blinds us. When something challenges this image, the mind reacts defensively. Instead of calmly examining the feedback, we look for ways to dismiss it. If someone criticizes us, we question their motives. If we fail, we blame circumstances. If we hurt someone, we justify our behavior. These reactions happen so quickly that we mistake them for truth. The problem is not that we have an ego. The problem is that we are unaware of how aggressively it filters reality. Consider how memory works. We do not remember events as they happened. We remember them as they felt, and then we reshape them to fit our current narrative. Over time, we become the hero of our own story. Conflicts become examples of how others misunderstood us. Successes become proof of our superior judgment. Failures become exceptions caused by bad luck. This quiet rewriting creates overconfidence. And overconfidence is one of the most dangerous traits in human nature. It leads people to overestimate their knowledge, underestimate risks, and dismiss opposing views. Entire careers collapse because someone believed too strongly in their own infallibility. What makes this even more subtle is that intelligence does not protect against it. In fact, highly intelligent people are often better at rationalizing their mistakes. They can construct convincing explanations for why they were right, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Their logic becomes a servant of their ego. The antidote begins with a simple but uncomfortable admission: you are more biased than you think. We are drawn to information that confirms what we already believe. We avoid data that threatens our identity. We prefer people who agree with us and unconsciously distance ourselves from those who challenge us. Over time, this creates a closed mental system. Inside that system, everything appears consistent and validated. Outside it, alternative perspectives are dismissed as ignorant or malicious. This is how groups become polarized. This is how leaders become isolated. This is how relationships deteriorate without either person fully understanding why. To counter this, you must deliberately cultivate doubt. Not paralyzing self-doubt, but strategic skepticism about your own certainty. When you feel absolutely convinced, that is the moment to pause. Ask yourself what evidence would prove you wrong. Imagine the perspective of someone who disagrees with you. Force yourself to articulate their argument fairly. This practice weakens the ego's grip. It creates mental flexibility. Another powerful illusion we carry is the belief that our intentions matter more than our impact. When we judge ourselves, we look at what we meant to do. When we judge others, we look at what they actually did. This double standard quietly fuels resentment. If you snap at someone, you excuse it because you were stressed. If someone snaps at you, you interpret it as disrespect. You grant yourself context but deny it to others. Once you see this pattern, it becomes difficult to ignore. You begin to recognize how often misunderstandings are rooted not in malice, but in mismatched interpretations. There is also the tendency to see traits as fixed rather than fluid. We label people quickly: difficult, lazy, arrogant, weak. Once labeled, every action they take is filtered through that description. We stop seeing nuance. We stop noticing change. But human behavior is situational. A confident executive may become insecure in a romantic relationship. A quiet employee may display leadership in the right environment. A disciplined athlete may struggle with financial decisions. When you reduce people to single traits, you miss the complexity that defines them. The same applies to yourself. If you believe you are bad at confrontation, you avoid it and reinforce the belief. If you think you are not creative, you never experiment. Identity becomes a prison built from repeated assumptions. Breaking free requires seeing personality as adaptable. Traits are tendencies, not destinies. Perhaps one of the most destructive illusions is the belief that we are independent thinkers, unaffected by social influence. In reality, humans are deeply shaped by group dynamics. We adjust opinions to fit in. We mimic behaviors unconsciously. We adopt emotional tones from those around us. In a group setting, individuals often suppress doubts to maintain harmony. This creates a false sense of agreement. Decisions made in such environments can be deeply flawed, yet no one speaks up because each person assumes others are more certain. To resist this pull, you must strengthen your ability to stand alone psychologically. This does not mean being contrarian for the sake of it. It means being comfortable holding a perspective even when it is unpopular. It means separating belonging from agreement. At the same time, understanding social influence allows you to navigate it strategically. You begin noticing who sets the emotional tone in a room. You observe how confidence, even when unwarranted, persuades others. You see how repetition shapes belief more than logic does. All of this leads to a deeper realization: much of human behavior is driven by forces we barely recognize in ourselves. The ego protects, distorts, and defends. Emotion precedes logic. Memory reshapes reality. Social pressure molds belief. Identity solidifies patterns that feel permanent but are not. When you internalize these truths, something shifts. You become slower to react, slower to judge, slower to assume. You develop a kind of inner distance, the ability to observe your own thoughts as if they belong to someone else. That distance is power. It prevents you from being manipulated easily. It allows you to navigate conflicts without escalating them. It sharpens your perception of hidden motives, both in yourself and in others. But self, deception, and ego are only part of the equation. There are darker currents in human nature that operate even more subtly, forces like envy, aggression, and the craving for status. These forces shape competition, friendships, ambition, and even love in ways most people never consciously acknowledge. And once you begin to examine those deeper drives, you start to understand why some relationships quietly turn toxic, why success can provoke hostility instead of admiration, and why the pursuit of recognition can transform character in ways few anticipate. There is a strange moment that happens when someone close to you succeeds. On the surface, you smile. You congratulate them. You say the right words. But somewhere deeper, something tightens. It is subtle, almost invisible, and you may even feel ashamed for noticing it. That quiet discomfort is one of the most powerful and least discussed forces in human nature. Envy rarely announces itself openly. It does not say, "I resent this person." Instead, it disguises itself as criticism, indifference, or even moral judgment. You might tell yourself their success was luck. You might focus on their flaws. You might suddenly lose interest in being around them. The mind is clever at hiding what threatens the ego. Envy is painful because it forces comparison. It reminds you of what you lack, where you feel behind, where you fear you are insufficient. And since the ego resists feelings of inferiority, it looks for ways to restore balance. Sometimes that means improving yourself, but often, it means subtly pulling the other person down, if not in action, then at least in perception. This is why success can change relationships. When two people operate at similar levels, there is comfort. But when one rises significantly, the balance shifts. the achievement becomes a mirror. It reflects possibilities, but it also reflects insecurities. Most people will never admit envy, even to themselves. Instead, they rationalize it. They claim they simply see the truth about the successful person. They call it realism. They say they are being objective, but underneath the analysis lies wounded pride. Understanding this dynamic changes how you interpret social tension. If someone becomes distant after your achievement, it may not be betrayal. It may be discomfort. If you feel irritation towards someone's success, it may not be about them. It may be about your own self-evaluation. The mature response to envy is not suppression. It is transformation. Instead of allowing it to turn into resentment, you examine it. You ask what it reveals about your desires. Often, envy points directly towards something you want but have not pursued seriously. It exposes neglected ambition. But envy is only one expression of a deeper drive, the need for status. Human beings are acutely sensitive to their position within a group. From ancient tribes to modern corporations, survival and opportunity have depended on relative standing. Status determines influence, access, and respect. Even when we claim not to care about it, our behavior reveals otherwise. You can see this in subtle signals: how people speak in meetings, how they react to being interrupted, how they subtly compete for attention. Status anxiety shapes tone, posture, and decision-making. It drives ambition, but it also fuels insecurity. When someone feels their status threatened, their reaction can be disproportionate. A minor disagreement can feel like a personal attack. A small oversight can feel like disrespect. The emotional intensity is not about the event itself. It is about perceived ranking. This explains why certain conflicts escalate quickly. What appears to be a disagreement about ideas is often a hidden struggle for dominance. Each person wants acknowledgement, validation, recognition of competence. Once you recognize status sensitivity, you begin navigating interactions differently. You learn to give credit strategically. You understand that making someone feel valued often reduces resistance more effectively than winning an argument. You see that many people are not fighting for truth, they are fighting to protect their standing. At the same time, you become aware of your own status triggers. You notice when criticism feels sharper than it should. You observe when you feel the urge to assert superiority. These moments reveal attachment to image. The desire for status connects closely with another powerful trait, narcissism. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. At the extreme end are individuals who lack empathy and exploit others without guilt. But at milder levels, narcissistic tendencies are common. We all crave attention. We all want to feel special. We all construct identities we want others to admire. In moderation, this can fuel achievement. The desire to be recognized can push you to develop skills and create value. But when unchecked, it distorts relationships. It turns interactions into performances. It shifts focus from contribution to validation. A narcissistic pattern becomes dangerous when a person depends entirely on external affirmation to feel stable. Criticism becomes intolerable. Boundaries feel threatening. Other people's needs become secondary. These individuals often appear charismatic at first. They project confidence and vision. But over time, their inability to handle vulnerability or share credit creates instability. They demand loyalty but struggle to reciprocate empathy. Learning to identify these patterns protects you. Excessive charm combined with hypersensitivity to criticism is often a warning sign. Grand promises without consistent accountability signal imbalance. Over time, such personalities generate cycles of admiration and disappointment. Yet the most important narcissism to observe is your own. Notice when conversations subtly shift back to you. Notice when you feel restless if you are not acknowledged. Notice when silence feels like rejection. These small signals reveal dependency on validation. As you become aware of envy, status drive, and narcissism, you begin to see how much of social life revolves around invisible competition. Even friendships can contain subtle rivalries. Even collaborations can carry quiet comparison. But there is another layer: aggression. Aggression does not always appear as shouting or violence. Often it is passive. It hides in sarcasm, withdrawal, subtle undermining. When people feel powerless to express anger directly, they release it indirectly. A colleague may forget to share crucial information. A friend may make backhanded compliments. A partner may grow cold instead of communicating frustration. These behaviors often stem from unexpressed resentment. The danger of unacknowledged aggression is accumulation. Small grievances build quietly. Without awareness, they eventually erupt in ways that seem disproportionate to the triggering event. To navigate this, emotional honesty becomes essential. Suppressed anger does not disappear. It transforms. When you learn to recognize irritation early, before it hardens into resentment, you prevent escalation. At a broader level, aggression is tied to frustration. When people feel blocked from goals, ignored, or humiliated, they look for outlets. Sometimes they direct it outward, sometimes inward. Understanding this helps you depersonalize certain behaviors. Someone lashing out may be responding to accumulated frustration unrelated to you. This does not excuse harm, but it clarifies motive. As these forces intertwine, envy, status anxiety, narcissism, aggression, you start to see how fragile social harmony can be. Politeness often masks competition. Cooperation sometimes hides rivalry. Admiration can coexist with resentment. Yet this awareness does not need to make you cynical. It can make you perceptive. When you recognize the underlying drives, you stop being naive, but you also stop being shocked. You anticipate tension when someone's status shifts. You understand discomfort around rapid success. You detect subtle hostility before it grows. Most importantly, you begin managing your own inner currents. You convert envy into direction. You detach from excessive status comparison. You reduce the need for constant validation. You address frustration before it mutates into aggression. And as you develop this internal discipline, another question naturally arises. If so much of behavior is driven by hidden impulses and unconscious competition, is it possible to truly change? Can people rise above these patterns, or are they permanently bound by them? It is easy to believe that people never really change. You see someone repeat the same mistake for years, fall into the same relationship patterns, sabotage the same opportunities, and it begins to feel permanent. Personality appears fixed. Habits look unbreakable. Reactions seem automatic. But beneath that surface repetition lies something more fluid than it first appears. Human nature has structure. Yes, we are shaped by temperament, early experiences, emotional wounds, and social conditioning. These forces create strong tendencies. But tendencies are not destiny. The difference between someone trapped in patterns and someone who evolves is not intelligence or luck. It is awareness combined with deliberate effort. Most people operate on autopilot. They respond to triggers the same way they did 10 years ago. A tone of voice sparks defensiveness. A setback sparks self-doubt. Rejection sparks withdrawal. These reactions feel natural because they are familiar. Familiarity creates identity. This is just who I am, people say, without realizing they are describing a loop, not a fixed self. The first step toward change is recognizing the loop. Every recurring problem in your life likely follows a pattern. There is a trigger, an emotional reaction, a behavior, and then a consequence. The consequence reinforces the belief that the world is a certain way. That belief then sharpens sensitivity to similar triggers in the future. For example, someone who fears abandonment may become overly demanding in relationships. That intensity pushes others away. When the relationship ends, it confirms their belief that people always leave. The cycle strengthens. Breaking a pattern requires interrupting it at the emotional level, not just the behavioral one. If you only try to change the outward action while the underlying belief remains intact, the pattern will resurface in a new form. This is why self-observation must be brutally honest. You have to notice not just what you do, but what you feel before you do it. The slight tightening in your chest before you argue. The subtle jealousy before you criticize. The insecurity before you boast. Most people avoid this level of introspection because it is uncomfortable. It threatens the story they tell about themselves. But discomfort is the gateway to growth. There is also the matter of role-playing. Over time, people adopt certain roles within families, workplaces, and friendships. The responsible one, the rebel, the peacemaker, the achiever, the victim. Once a role becomes established, others expect it, and you unconsciously perform it. Roles provide stability, but they can also become prisons. If you are always the strong one, you may struggle to ask for help. If you are labeled difficult, you may lean into confrontation even when it is unnecessary. If you are seen as the quiet one, you may silence ideas that deserve expression. True change often begins with questioning the role. Ask yourself who you would be without it. What behaviors have you repeated simply because they were expected? There is a powerful shift that happens when you realize you are not your impulses. An impulse is a surge of emotion. It rises, peaks, and fades. But when you identify with it completely, you act as though it defines you. I am angry, instead of I feel anger. That subtle difference creates space. In that space lies choice. Choice does not eliminate human nature. You will still feel envy, irritation, pride, fear, but you will not be enslaved by them. You will recognize them as passing states rather than permanent truths. Developing this inner separation requires practice. It means slowing down reactions. It means resisting the immediate urge to respond to provocation. It means tolerating the discomfort of not defending yourself instantly. This restraint is not weakness. It is strength directed inward. Another aspect of transformation involves empathy. When you deeply understand that others are driven by their own fears and insecurities, your interpretation of their actions shifts. Instead of reacting to surface behavior, you look for underlying causes. This does not mean becoming naive or allowing manipulation. It means responding strategically rather than emotionally. If someone is acting aggressively because they feel threatened, attacking back may escalate the situation. Addressing the insecurity calmly may neutralize it. Empathy, in this sense, is not softness. It is perception sharpened by emotional intelligence. There is also power in adaptability. Rigid personalities break under pressure. Flexible ones bend. Adaptability does not mean abandoning principles. It means adjusting tactics while preserving core values. In changing environments, those who cling stubbornly to outdated identities struggle. Those who observe, learn, and recalibrate thrive. History repeatedly shows that survival often favors flexibility over brute strength. On a personal level, adaptability means accepting feedback without collapse. It means experimenting with new behaviors even if they feel unnatural at first. Growth often feels awkward before it feels authentic, but transformation requires patience. You cannot dismantle patterns built over decades in a few weeks. The mind resists change because familiarity feels safe, even when it is dysfunctional. Expect setbacks. Expect moments where old reactions resurface. Progress is rarely linear. What matters is returning to awareness quickly. Each time you catch yourself earlier in the cycle, you weaken its grip. There is also a deeper dimension to change: purpose. When people lack direction, they drift into comparison and status games. They become consumed by external validation because they have no internal anchor. But when someone is aligned with a meaningful aim, petty rivalries lose intensity. Energy redirects toward creation rather than competition. Purpose stabilizes identity. It provides context for setbacks. It reduces the need for constant approval. This is why individuals who dedicate themselves to a craft, a mission, or a long-term vision often display greater emotional resilience. Their sense of worth is tied less to momentary reactions and more to sustained effort. Ultimately, rising above destructive patterns requires integration. You do not eliminate the darker aspects of your nature. You understand them, channel them, and balance them with conscious intention. The aggressive drive can become assertiveness. The desire for status can become disciplined ambition. The need for validation can become a commitment to genuine contribution. Human nature contains raw energy. Left unconscious, it creates chaos. Directed with awareness, it becomes strength. And yet, even with personal growth, you will continue living among others who remain unaware of their own patterns. You will encounter manipulators, chronic victims, rigid thinkers, and hidden aggressors. The question then becomes not only how to transform yourself, but how to recognize and navigate the different character types you will inevitably meet, and how to protect your mental clarity without losing your humanity in the process. If you pay close attention to the people around you, patterns begin to emerge. At first, personalities seem endlessly complex. Everyone appears unique, unpredictable, layered. But over time, you start noticing familiar emotional rhythms. Certain individuals consistently drain energy. Others consistently create tension. Some leave you feeling calm and expanded. Others leave you subtly diminished. These effects are not random. They are expressions of stable character structures. One of the most important skills you can develop in life is reading character accurately. Not judging superficially, not labeling carelessly, but observing repeated behavior over time. Words are cheap. Intentions are easy to declare. Character reveals itself in patterns. There are individuals who operate primarily through insecurity masked as superiority. They subtly position themselves above others. Conversations become competitions. They rarely admit mistakes. When challenged, they shift blame or question the credibility of the critic. At first, their confidence can seem impressive, but over time, cracks appear. Their self-esteem depends heavily on external reinforcement, and when that reinforcement weakens, so does their composure. Engaging with such personalities requires emotional distance. Direct confrontation often triggers defensiveness. Excessive praise feeds their ego. The most effective approach is calm neutrality. Do not challenge their self-image aggressively, but do not reinforce it unnecessarily. Let their need for dominance exhaust itself against your steadiness. Then there are chronic victims. These individuals consistently frame themselves as misunderstood, mistreated, or unlucky. Nothing is ever fully their responsibility. Every failure has an external cause. Every conflict is someone else's fault. At first, they evoke sympathy. But over time, you realize the pattern is constant. The danger here is subtle. If you spend enough time around someone who avoids accountability, you may begin carrying emotional burdens that are not yours. You may overextend yourself trying to fix problems that repeat because their root is unexamined. The key is compassion without absorption. You can acknowledge their pain without accepting their narrative entirely. Encourage responsibility gently, but recognize that true change requires willingness from them. Another difficult type is the passive, aggressive personality. On the surface, they appear agreeable. They avoid direct confrontation. But their resentment leaks through indirect behaviors, forgotten commitments, subtle sarcasm, delayed responses. Because the hostility is not explicit, it creates confusion. You sense something is wrong, but nothing is openly stated. The solution here is clarity. Bring issues into the open calmly. Name behaviors without accusation. Indirect aggression thrives in ambiguity. When exposed to direct light, it loses power. There are also those driven almost entirely by control. They struggle deeply with uncertainty. They micromanage. They resist delegation. They interpret independence as rebellion. Often, this behavior stems from anxiety. Control gives them the illusion of safety. Fighting for dominance with such individuals usually escalates tension. Instead, providing structured reassurance can reduce friction. When they feel secure, their grip loosens slightly. But it is important to maintain boundaries. Excessive accommodation reinforces their need to control. Beyond these more difficult types, there are highly competitive personalities. They measure themselves constantly against others. Every achievement becomes a comparison point. Collaboration feels threatening unless they are clearly leading. Competition itself is not harmful. In fact, it can drive excellence. But when identity depends entirely on winning, relationships suffer. The competitive individual may struggle to celebrate others sincerely. They may interpret neutral events as challenges. With them, it helps to reframe interactions as shared progress rather than zero-sum outcomes. Emphasize mutual benefit. Redirect focus toward collective goals. Some will adapt. Others remain trapped in rivalry. As you observe these character types, you may feel tempted to categorize rigidly. But remember, most people contain elements of several patterns. The goal is not to label permanently. It is to anticipate behavior realistically. What matters most is consistency. Anyone can behave generously once. Anyone can apologize once. But character is revealed through repetition under stress. Watch how someone reacts to failure. Watch how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Watch how they respond when they lose status. These moments strip away performance. At the same time, apply this lens inward. You are not exempt from these patterns. In certain environments, you may become more controlling. In others, more defensive. Under pressure, you may drift toward behaviors you criticize in others. This awareness prevents arrogance. It keeps perception balanced. Navigating complex personalities also requires emotional regulation. If you react impulsively to every difficult trait, you become predictable. And predictability makes you easier to manipulate. Calm observation disrupts manipulation. When someone tries to provoke guilt, notice it. When someone attempts to dominate through intimidation, observe the tactic rather than absorbing the emotion. When someone flatters excessively, question the motive quietly. Emotional self-control does not mean coldness. It means steadiness. It allows you to respond proportionally instead of reflexively. There is also the matter of boundaries. Understanding human nature does not require tolerating harmful behavior indefinitely. In fact, clear boundaries often reveal character faster than anything else. When you say no respectfully and someone reacts with rage or withdrawal, you learn something crucial. Healthy individuals may feel disappointment, but they respect limits. Unhealthy ones interpret boundaries as threats. Over time, as you sharpen this ability to read patterns, you become less easily deceived. Charm loses its blinding effect. Victim. Narratives no longer override logic. Aggression no longer intimidates you automatically. You begin choosing associations more intentionally. This discernment does not make you cynical. It makes you selective. You conserve energy for relationships that are reciprocal and growth-oriented. You step away from cycles that repeat without improvement. Yet even with strong perception and boundaries, there remains a deeper social force shaping behavior, the influence of the collective. Individuals rarely act in isolation. Groups amplify traits, distort judgment, and create momentum that overrides personal restraint. To fully understand human nature, you must look beyond individual psychology and examine what happens when people merge into crowds, movements, institutions, and cultures. Because within the group, something shifts, and the individual you thought you understood can behave in ways you never expected. There is a noticeable shift that happens when individuals step into a group. Alone, a person may appear thoughtful, restrained, even cautious. But inside a crowd, something changes. Emotions intensify. Opinions harden. Actions become bolder, sometimes reckless. It is as if personal identity dissolves slightly, replaced by a shared energy that feels larger and more powerful. This transformation is one of the most underestimated forces in human behavior. When people gather, they do not simply add their personalities together. They multiply emotion. A crowd can elevate courage, but it can also magnify fear. It can inspire generosity, but it can just as easily justify cruelty. The group creates a psychological shield. Responsibility feels diluted. Everyone is doing it becomes silent permission. You can observe this in everyday situations. In meetings, individuals may agree with ideas they privately doubt because dissent feels risky. In online spaces, people say things they would never say face to face because anonymity weakens accountability. In political or social movements, extreme positions gain momentum because belonging feels safer than standing apart. The need to belong runs deep in human nature. For most of history, isolation meant danger. Acceptance meant survival. That instinct has not disappeared. Even today, rejection activates the brain in ways similar to physical pain. This is why social pressure can override personal judgment. Within groups, a powerful dynamic emerges. Emotional contagion. Feelings spread rapidly without conscious awareness. Excitement escalates. Outrage intensifies. Fear amplifies. Very few people pause to examine whether the emotion is justified. The intensity itself becomes proof. Leaders who understand this can influence large numbers of people with remarkable efficiency. They know that logic alone rarely moves crowds. Emotion does. Repetition does. Symbolism does. Clear narratives that divide the world into simple categories, right and wrong, us and them, create cohesion. The more uncertain the environment, the more attractive these simplified narratives become. Complexity feels uncomfortable. Ambiguity creates anxiety. A strong voice offering clarity, even if misleading, provides relief. This is how groupthink forms. Once a dominant opinion establishes itself within a group, opposing views begin to feel dangerous. Individuals suppress doubts to avoid conflict. Over time, silence is interpreted as agreement. The illusion of unanimity strengthens. History is filled with examples of intelligent individuals participating in disastrous collective decisions, not because they lacked intelligence, but because social pressure distorted perception. When everyone appears certain, doubt feels like weakness. To resist this pull requires inner independence. You must separate your sense of belonging from your willingness to question. This is not easy. It means tolerating moments of discomfort. It means accepting that standing apart may temporarily reduce approval. But independence does not mean isolation. It means engaging with groups consciously rather than dissolving into them unconsciously. There is another layer to collective behavior: the creation of shared identity. Groups often define themselves in contrast to others. This strengthens unity internally but increases hostility externally. The more tightly bonded the in-group becomes, the more suspicious it grows of outsiders. This instinct is ancient. Tribal survival depended on clear boundaries. But in modern society, this tendency can lead to polarization. Nuance disappears. Opponents are no longer seen as individuals with complex motives. They become symbols of threat. Once people are reduced to symbols, empathy declines. It becomes easier to justify aggression. Words become harsher. Actions become more extreme. Recognizing this pattern allows you to step back. When you feel strong emotional reactions toward entire categories of people, pause. Ask whether you are responding to individuals or to an abstract narrative. Groups also create hierarchies quickly. Informal leaders emerge. Some dominate through charisma, others through competence, others through sheer confidence. Once established, hierarchies influence behavior subtly. People adjust tone and opinion based on who holds influence. In organizations, this dynamic shapes culture. If leadership rewards honesty and accountability, those traits spread. If leadership rewards flattery and conformity, those behaviors multiply instead. The collective amplifies whatever signals are strongest at the top. This is why self-awareness in positions of authority is critical. A leader's emotional instability can ripple through an entire institution. A leader's paranoia can create a culture of fear. Conversely, steady leadership can stabilize large groups even in uncertainty. But influence works horizontally as well. Peer groups shape standards of behavior. If mediocrity becomes normalized, ambition declines. If discipline becomes common, productivity rises. Humans calibrate themselves against those around them constantly. Understanding this, you become more intentional about your environment. You recognize that prolonged exposure to certain attitudes slowly reshapes your own mindset. Energy is contagious. So is cynicism. So is focus. Choosing your associations wisely is not arrogance. It is psychological hygiene. Yet even when you cultivate independence and awareness, you are still part of society. You will participate in teams, communities, and movements. The goal is not detachment from all groups. It is conscious participation. Observe emotional waves without being swept away. Listen to dominant narratives without surrendering critical thought. Engage passionately, but maintain a private space within your mind that remains reflective. There is strength in this dual position, connected yet independent. As you integrate this understanding of individual psychology and group dynamics, a clearer picture emerges. Human behavior is not random. It follows emotional patterns, status drives, identity needs, and social pressures. Most conflict, manipulation, and misunderstanding grow from these roots. But awareness alone is not the final step. There remains a deeper challenge: cultivating a balanced, integrated version of yourself that can operate within this complex landscape without becoming hardened or cynical. Because the ultimate aim is not simply to decode human nature, it is to master your own. There comes a point where understanding human behavior is no longer about analyzing others. It turns inward. After recognizing ego, envy, status games, manipulation, group pressure, and unconscious patterns, the deeper question quietly appears: who are you beneath all of it? It is easy to become overly focused on detecting flaws in others. Once you learn to read insecurity, you see it everywhere. Once you recognize narcissism, it becomes obvious in conversations. Once you understand manipulation, it seems constant. But if you stop there, you risk becoming guarded, suspicious, emotionally distant. True mastery is not about superiority. It is about integration. Inside every person exist contradictions, strength and vulnerability, confidence and doubt, generosity and selfishness, discipline and impulse. Many people try to present only their polished side to the world. They deny the darker impulses. They suppress insecurity. They hide fear. But what is suppressed does not disappear. It waits. And often, it leaks out in distorted ways. Integration begins with radical acceptance of your full range. You are capable of jealousy. You are capable of pettiness. You are capable of selfish decisions. Acknowledging this does not make you worse. It makes you conscious. When you deny these traits, they operate unconsciously. When you admit them, you gain influence over them. There is something stabilizing about accepting your imperfections without dramatizing them. You stop wasting energy pretending to be flawless. You become less defensive when criticized because you no longer depend on maintaining a perfect self-image. This inner stability changes how you move through the world. When you are not obsessed with protecting your ego, feedback becomes information instead of threat. When you are not desperate for validation, praise becomes pleasant but not addictive. When you are not terrified of rejection, boundaries become easier to set. A balanced person is not emotionless. They feel deeply, but they are not ruled by every emotional wave. Developing this balance requires patience. It means observing recurring emotional triggers and tracing them back to their roots. It means asking uncomfortable questions. Why does that type of comment irritate you so much? Why does someone else's success unsettle you? Why does silence sometimes feel like judgment? Often, the answers lead back to early conditioning. The need to prove yourself. The fear of being overlooked. The habit of earning approval. These patterns once served a purpose. Perhaps they helped you adapt to a difficult environment. But what once protected you may now limit you. Growth requires updating these internal programs. There is also power in embracing your unique temperament rather than fighting it. Some people are naturally intense. Others are reflective. Some thrive in social environments. Others in solitude. Problems arise when you try to force yourself into roles misaligned with your nature simply to gain approval or status. Self-knowledge clarifies where your strengths lie. Instead of comparing constantly, you focus on refining your own capacities. At the same time, maturity demands confronting weaknesses honestly, not with shame, but with strategy. If you know you are prone to impatience, you design systems that slow you down. If you know you struggle with confrontation, you practice clear communication gradually instead of avoiding it entirely. Self-mastery is not about dramatic transformation. It is about consistent refinement. Another crucial element of integration is developing empathy without losing discernment. Understanding human frailty should increase compassion, but not at the expense of self-respect. You can recognize someone's insecurity without tolerating their harmful behavior. You can understand someone's fear without absorbing their chaos. This balance protects both your clarity and your humanity. Over time, as you observe yourself and others more accurately, something interesting happens. You become less reactive. Situations that once triggered strong emotional swings begin to feel manageable. You notice tension rising within you, but you do not immediately act on it. You watch it. You let it settle. This simple pause changes outcomes dramatically. People who lack this pause often create unnecessary conflict. They speak from temporary emotion and then regret it later. They assume intent without evidence. They escalate small misunderstandings into lasting damage. The pause is small, but its impact is enormous. It allows you to choose responses aligned with long-term goals rather than short-term ego protection. There is also freedom in releasing the need to control how others perceive you. Reputation matters, but obsession with image leads to inauthentic behavior. When you focus too heavily on managing impressions, you become fragmented. You act differently in every context, trying to optimize approval. Integration simplifies this. You operate from consistent values. You accept that not everyone will approve. You understand that misunderstanding is sometimes unavoidable. This grounded presence influences others more than forced charm ever could. Ironically, the less you chase validation, the more stable your influence becomes. People sense authenticity. They sense when someone is not desperately seeking approval. That quiet confidence commands respect without demanding it. As you integrate these insights, human nature stops feeling like a battlefield and starts feeling like terrain. Complex, yes, sometimes dangerous, but navigable. You recognize emotional currents in conversations without drowning in them. You detect status dynamics without becoming obsessed. You sense group pressure without surrendering your judgment. You acknowledge your own ego without being enslaved by it. And in doing so, you step into a different mode of living. Less reactive, more observant, calm but not passive, empathetic but not naive. The world does not become simpler. People do not suddenly stop being driven by insecurity, ambition, or envy, but you move through these realities with clearer vision. Ultimately, understanding human nature is not about gaining control over others. It is about gaining control over yourself. It is about recognizing that beneath every conflict, every manipulation, every insecurity, there is a shared human struggle for significance, safety, and meaning. When you see that clearly, your responses shift. You become harder to provoke, harder to deceive, harder to intimidate. Yet you also become more patient, more strategic, more humane. And perhaps that is the deepest insight of all. Human nature contains darkness and light in equal measure. The goal is not to eliminate one side, but to become conscious enough to choose which side you strengthen, in yourself first, and then in the influence you carry into the lives of others. If you step back and look at everything you have begun to understand, a quiet realization forms. The greatest battles you will ever fight are not with other people, they are within yourself. Every external conflict is, in some way, a reflection of internal forces, ego clashing with ego, insecurity reacting to insecurity, fear meeting fear. Once you see this clearly, your approach to life changes at its foundation. There is a tendency, especially after learning about manipulation and darker traits, to become defensive, to build psychological armor, to trust less. But living in constant defense is exhausting. It shrinks your world. The deeper path is not paranoia. It is clarity combined with inner strength. Clarity means you no longer romanticize human behavior. You do not assume pure intentions blindly. You recognize the presence of envy, status games, hidden aggression, and emotional contagion. But inner strength means you are not destabilized by these realities. You expect imperfection because you understand human nature, including your own. At this stage, emotional maturity becomes your greatest asset. Emotional maturity is not about suppressing feeling. It is about metabolizing it. When anger arises, you process it instead of projecting it instantly. When envy appears, you translate it into information about your unmet desires. When pride swells, you temper it with awareness. Emotions become signals, not commands. This creates a steadiness that is rare. Most people live in reaction mode. Their mood depends on praise or criticism. Their confidence rises and falls with comparison. Their sense of worth shifts based on external events. But when you detach your identity from these fluctuations, you become internally anchored. An anchored person cannot be easily manipulated. Flattery loses its power because you are not starving for validation. Intimidation loses its effect because your self-worth does not rely on dominance. Social pressure weakens because belonging is not purchased at the cost of authenticity. This does not make you rigid. It makes you centered. There is also a profound shift in how you pursue ambition. Earlier, ambition may have been fueled by competition, by the need to outshine others, by fear of being insignificant. But as awareness deepens, ambition can become cleaner. It transforms into the desire to express your abilities fully, to build something meaningful, to contribute. When ambition is rooted in insecurity, it creates endless comparison. When it is rooted in purpose, it creates sustained focus. You begin to measure progress against your own potential rather than against someone else's position. This quiet recalibration removes much of the anxiety that dominates modern life. Another change happens in relationships. You stop expecting people to complete you or constantly affirm you. You understand that everyone carries unresolved patterns. You choose companions who demonstrate self-awareness, accountability, and growth. You no longer chase intensity for its own sake. You value stability and mutual respect. Conflicts still arise, but they are handled with greater clarity. Instead of escalating defensively, you examine your contribution to the tension. Instead of assuming malicious intent, you ask questions. Instead of trying to win arguments, you aim to resolve misunderstandings. This approach often diffuses situations before they spiral. At a broader level, you start seeing society itself differently. Public conflicts, political divisions, cultural tensions, they no longer appear purely ideological. You recognize status struggles, identity fears, group psychology. This awareness does not remove disagreement, but it reduces emotional volatility. You become less susceptible to outrage cycles, less reactive to collective hysteria, more measured in judgment. There is strength in that calmness. Yet perhaps the most important transformation is humility. The deeper you understand human nature, the more you realize how easy it is to fall into blind spots. No one is immune to ego. No one is permanently enlightened. Awareness must be continuous. You will still make mistakes. You will still misread situations. You will still act from impulse at times. But the difference is recovery. Instead of defending errors endlessly, you correct them faster. Instead of burying flaws, you acknowledge them. Humility protects growth. It keeps you curious. It keeps you adaptable. It prevents the subtle arrogance that can arise from believing you have fully mastered yourself. In the end, the study of human nature is not meant to make you cold or calculating. It is meant to make you conscious, to give you language for patterns you once felt but could not name, to reveal the hidden architecture behind everyday interactions. When you see clearly, you suffer less from unnecessary confusion. You take fewer things personally. You waste less energy on ego battles. You invest more energy in meaningful work and relationships. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to accept the complexity of being human. You accept that you will sometimes feel contradictory emotions, that you will carry both confidence and doubt, that others will disappoint you, not always out of cruelty, but out of their own limitations. This acceptance softens judgment without lowering standards. It allows you to remain strong without becoming hardened. Human nature does not change. The drives for status, belonging, recognition, control, and meaning will always exist, but your relationship to these drives can evolve. You can choose awareness over impulse, strategy over reaction, purpose over comparison, integration over denial. And in doing so, you quietly step into a rare position. Someone who understands the game of human behavior without being consumed by it. Someone who moves through social complexity with calm perception. Someone who recognizes darkness without feeding it. That is not perfection. It is conscious living. And once you begin living that way, you realize the ultimate power was never about controlling others. It was about mastering the only territory you truly possess, your own mind, your own reactions, your own character. If you have followed this journey carefully, one final layer begins to reveal itself. Understanding human nature is not simply about protection or strategy. It is about responsibility. Once you see the patterns clearly, ego, envy, insecurity, group pressure, status games, you can no longer pretend you are unaware of how your actions ripple outward. Awareness creates accountability. Before, you may have reacted sharply and blamed the other person. You may have participated in gossip without thinking about the subtle damage it spreads. You may have fueled competition in ways that quietly eroded trust. But once you recognize the fragile emotional structures inside every human being, your behavior naturally becomes more deliberate. You begin to see how easily confidence can be crushed, how quickly shame can harden into resentment, how minor disrespect can trigger major retaliation. Human beings are more sensitive than they appear. Pride covers vulnerability. Arrogance hides fear. Even aggression often masks insecurity. When you interact with this awareness, your words carry more precision. You do not criticize recklessly. You understand that attacking someone's identity will provoke defense, not growth. If correction is necessary, you focus on behavior rather than character. You separate the person from the mistake. This small distinction preserves dignity while still addressing reality. In leadership, this awareness becomes even more critical. Authority magnifies impact. A careless remark from someone in power can echo for years in the mind of an employee, a child, a student. Conversely, a calm, fair response under pressure can inspire loyalty and stability. Power reveals character. It amplifies both strengths and weaknesses. If you seek influence in any form, business, art, community, family, your inner work determines the quality of that influence. Unexamined ego in leadership creates fear-based cultures. Insecurity at the top breeds competition and politics below. But grounded confidence fosters trust. And trust is fragile. Trust is built slowly through consistency. It is destroyed quickly through hypocrisy. People watch not what you claim to value, but what you consistently reward and tolerate. If you preach accountability but avoid it yourself, credibility dissolves. If you demand honesty but react harshly to truth, silence replaces transparency. Understanding human nature helps you align behavior with intention. There is also responsibility in how you handle conflict. Most escalations occur because two egos collide without awareness. One feels disrespected. The other feels misunderstood. Both defend. Very few pause. If you become the person who pauses first, you shift the entire dynamic. Pausing does not mean surrendering your position. It means regulating emotion long enough to see clearly. It means asking, what is really being threatened here? Often, it is not the issue itself but pride or fear of losing status. By addressing the emotional layer instead of just the surface disagreement, resolution becomes possible. Another dimension of responsibility lies in resisting manipulation. When you understand tactics like guilt induction, flattery, fear, mongering, or manufactured urgency, you become harder to control. But the mature step beyond recognizing manipulation is refusing to use it yourself. Short-term advantage gained through psychological exploitation often produces long-term instability. People may comply temporarily, but resentment builds. Sustainable influence comes from respect, not coercion. There is also a quiet responsibility in modeling self-awareness. When you admit mistakes openly, you create psychological safety for others to do the same. When you respond to criticism thoughtfully instead of defensively, you normalize growth. When you acknowledge complexity instead of simplifying everything into rigid categories, you reduce polarization in your immediate environment. Small actions ripple. At a personal level, the final integration of these lessons leads to a kind of inner calm that does not depend heavily on external validation. You understand that people will misinterpret you at times. Some will project their insecurities onto you. Some will envy you. Some will compete unnecessarily. These behaviors no longer shock you. You prepare without becoming paranoid. You forgive without becoming naive. You protect boundaries without hostility. This balance is rare because it requires continuous awareness. It requires monitoring your own ego even as you navigate others. It requires humility even as you develop confidence. Over time, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop seeing human flaws as interruptions to life. You see them as part of its fabric. You recognize that everyone is managing invisible battles, identity struggles, status fears, unresolved wounds. Compassion grows, but it is grounded in realism. And perhaps the deepest realization is this: the laws governing human nature apply to you every single day. There is no graduation point where you are free from bias, emotion, or ego. The work is ongoing. Awareness must be renewed in every interaction, every ambition, every conflict. But that is not a burden. It is an opportunity. Each day becomes a field for practice, a chance to respond rather than react, a chance to strengthen character instead of image, a chance to elevate conversations instead of inflaming them. The world will always contain manipulation, insecurity, rivalry, and group hysteria. You cannot eliminate these forces globally, but you can reduce their presence in your immediate sphere. You can create environments, however small, defined by steadiness, fairness, and clarity. And that is influence at its highest form. In the end, understanding human nature is not about mastering others like pieces on a board. It is about mastering yourself so thoroughly that you no longer contribute unconsciously to the chaos you once complained about. When enough individuals take that responsibility seriously, even quietly, the tone of families shifts, workplaces shift, communities shift. It begins internally, it manifests externally, and it continues, not as a finished achievement, but as a lifelong discipline of awareness, restraint, courage, and measured action. That is the real power hidden within the complexity of human nature. When you reach this stage of understanding, something becomes very clear: the study of human nature is not meant to make you superior. It is meant to make you steady. Steadiness is rare. Most people are pulled constantly by invisible strings. Praise lifts them too high. Criticism drops them too low. Envy disturbs their peace. Competition dictates their mood. Social approval shapes their opinions. They are not weak, they are simply unaware of the forces acting on them. But once you see those forces clearly, you begin to detach from their control. Detachment does not mean indifference. It means you are no longer unconsciously entangled. You can participate in ambition without being consumed by it. You can enjoy recognition without depending on it. You can experience emotion without being ruled by it. That internal stability becomes your quiet advantage in every area of life. In work, it allows you to think long-term. While others react emotionally to setbacks or chase quick validation, you remain focused. You understand that impatience often comes from ego, the need to prove something quickly. But real achievement is built slowly, through discipline and emotional control. You also become harder to intimidate. Many power plays rely on triggering insecurity. When someone tries to belittle you, provoke you, or rush you into decisions, their tactic only works if you react automatically. If you remain composed, the tactic collapses. Emotional neutrality disarms manipulation more effectively than aggression ever could. In relationships, steadiness changes everything. You no longer interpret every mood shift as rejection. You no longer escalate small misunderstandings into dramatic conflicts. You recognize that others carry their own psychological burdens, just as you do. Instead of demanding constant reassurance, you offer consistency. Instead of seeking control, you build trust. Instead of reacting to perceived slights, you ask for clarity. This approach does not eliminate pain. Disappointment still happens. Betrayal is still possible. But you recover faster because your identity is not shattered by events. You do not collapse inward or explode outward. You process, adjust, and move forward. Another profound shift occurs in how you handle success. Success can be more dangerous than failure. It inflates ego quietly. It invites comparison. It attracts envy. If you are unaware, you may begin to believe your own mythology, that you are uniquely intelligent, uniquely deserving, uniquely superior. But awareness keeps you grounded. You understand that success is never purely individual. Circumstances, timing, collaboration, and even luck play roles. This humility protects you from arrogance. And arrogance, left unchecked, isolates. You also become more strategic about how you present success. You recognize that overt displays can provoke unnecessary envy. You learn discretion, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Not every achievement needs broadcasting. Quiet confidence often commands more respect than loud celebration. As your understanding deepens, you begin to value inner development more than external display. You realize that character is cumulative. Small daily choices, whether to react or reflect, whether to blame or examine yourself, whether to gossip or remain silent, shape who you become over years. Human nature does not disappear. You will still feel flashes of pride, irritation, insecurity. But the difference now is response time. You catch yourself sooner. You correct faster. You apologize more cleanly. You learn more consistently. This continuous refinement builds something powerful: self-trust. Self-trust is not arrogance. It is the confidence that you can handle your own emotions responsibly, that you will not sabotage yourself impulsively, that you will not betray your deeper values under pressure. With self-trust comes freedom. You are less afraid of challenges because you are less afraid of yourself. Many people avoid opportunities not because they lack ability, but because they fear their own reactions to stress or failure. When you trust your emotional regulation, risk becomes manageable. There is also a quiet joy in clarity. You stop wasting energy trying to decode every minor social signal. You stop obsessing over how you are perceived. You stop engaging in unnecessary rivalry. That mental space becomes available for creation, learning, building. Life feels less like a battlefield and more like a field of practice. And perhaps the most mature realization of all is this: you cannot control human nature in others. You can influence it, respond to it, anticipate it. But you cannot eliminate insecurity, ego, envy, or group pressure from the world. Trying to control everything creates frustration. Mastering yourself creates peace. From that peace, your influence becomes subtle but real. People feel safe around steadiness. They respect someone who does not overreact. They listen more closely to someone who speaks without ego-driven urgency. Over time, you may notice that conflicts around you soften. Not because the world has changed, but because your presence alters the dynamic. Emotional stability is contagious, just like emotional chaos. Calm spreads. Rationality spreads. Integrity spreads. The final layer of understanding human nature is recognizing that awareness is a lifelong discipline. It is not a switch you flip once. It is a lens you clean repeatedly. Stress, fatigue, and success can all cloud perception. Regular reflection keeps the lens clear. In the end, the greatest reward of understanding human nature is not power over others. It is sovereignty over yourself. You walk through life knowing that darkness exists, within you and within everyone else, but you are not afraid of it. You acknowledge it. You manage it. You refuse to let it rule you. And that quiet mastery, practiced daily and humbly, becomes your true strength. At the deepest level, everything returns to one simple but demanding truth: you are both the observer and the subject of human nature. You study it in others, but you live it within yourself. And that dual position requires ongoing honesty. There is no final stage where you become perfectly balanced, completely immune to ego, untouched by insecurity. The forces that shape humanity are ancient. They move through you as naturally as breath. What changes is not their existence, but your relationship to them. Over time, if you continue practicing awareness, you begin to notice your internal shifts in real time. A flash of jealousy appears, and instead of defending against it or acting on it, you quietly examine it. A surge of pride rises, and instead of inflating your identity, you let it pass without building a throne around it. A wave of anger forms, and instead of releasing it recklessly, you hold it long enough to understand its source. This ongoing observation builds depth. Depth is different from intelligence. It is different from charm. It is different from ambition. Depth is the ability to contain complexity without rushing to simplify it. It is the ability to feel conflicting emotions without collapsing into confusion. It is the ability to stand in uncertainty without demanding immediate relief. Most human conflict is driven by the need for quick emotional resolution. We want to discharge discomfort immediately. We want to win the argument now. We want reassurance instantly. But maturity stretches the space between stimulus and response. In that stretched space, wisdom forms. You begin to recognize that many of the tensions in life are not meant to be eliminated completely. Status competition will always exist. Social hierarchies will always form. Envy will always surface. Power dynamics will always operate in groups. Trying to erase these realities leads to frustration, but navigating them consciously leads to strength. There is also a profound shift in how you define success. Early in life, success often revolves around recognition, being seen, being validated, being admired. Later, with deeper understanding, success becomes internal alignment, acting in ways consistent with your principles, responding to stress without losing integrity, building relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than dependency. External markers begin to matter less than internal consistency. This does not make you passive or detached from achievement. It refines your ambition. You aim high, but you do not sacrifice your character in the process. You compete, but you do not let competition poison your peace. You lead, but you remain aware of your own fallibility. Another subtle but powerful development is forgiveness, not naive forgiveness, but informed forgiveness. When you understand that most harmful behavior grows from insecurity, fear, or unconscious patterns, resentment softens. You still maintain boundaries. You still hold people accountable, but you do not carry bitterness endlessly. You see that holding on to rage often binds you more tightly than the original offense. Forgiveness, in this sense, becomes an act of self-liberation. At the same time, you learn to forgive yourself more intelligently, not by excusing repeated mistakes, but by acknowledging imperfection without turning it into identity. Guilt becomes useful when it guides correction. It becomes destructive when it defines who you believe you are. Self-correction replaces self-condemnation. As these layers integrate, your presence changes in ways that are difficult to measure but easy to feel. Conversations with you feel less volatile. Decisions around you feel more thoughtful. People may not consciously understand why, but they sense the steadiness. And steadiness invites trust. Trust, once earned, multiplies influence quietly. You no longer need to dominate rooms or prove superiority. Your restraint becomes more powerful than someone else's aggression. Your listening becomes more persuasive than someone else's loud certainty. This is the paradox of mastering human nature. The less you try to control others, the more influence you naturally gain. Because true influence is not force. It is credibility. It is consistency. It is emotional reliability. In the end, the exploration of human nature leads you back to simplicity. Not simplistic thinking, but simple principles lived deeply. Pause before reacting. Question your certainty. Observe your ego. Transform envy into direction. Choose long-term respect over short-term victory. Participate in groups without surrendering your judgment. Lead without losing humility. Correct yourself quickly. Guard your integrity more fiercely than your image. These are not dramatic revelations. They are disciplines. Practiced daily, they compound. Ignored, they erode. The world will remain complex. People will remain flawed. You will remain human. But you will no longer be unconsciously tossed between emotion and impulse. You will move with awareness. And that awareness is the quiet foundation of strength, clarity, and lasting character. In the end, the true law governing human nature is this: what you refuse to examine will control you. What you are willing to examine, you can shape. The responsibility and the power has always been in your hands. At the very end of this exploration, there is a quiet realization that feels almost humbling. After analyzing ego, envy, status, aggression, manipulation, group psychology, ambition, and self-mastery, you begin to see that the real challenge was never about decoding others perfectly. It was about living consciously among imperfect people, including yourself. Human nature is not a puzzle to solve once and move on from. It is a landscape you walk through every single day. Some days you will walk through it calmly. Other days you will stumble. There will be moments when your ego rises faster than your awareness. There will be times when insecurity whispers louder than reason. There will be situations where you misread someone's intentions or overestimate your own objectivity. The difference now is not perfection. It is recovery. Earlier in life, a mistake might have triggered denial. Now, it triggers reflection. Earlier, criticism might have felt like an attack. Now, it feels like information, sometimes useful, sometimes biased, but worth examining. Earlier, envy might have quietly turned into resentment. Now, it becomes a signal pointing toward unexpressed desire. This shift from reaction to reflection is subtle, but it transforms your entire experience of life. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed personality, but as a dynamic system. Thoughts arise, emotions surge, narratives form, but none of them define you completely. You are the awareness behind them, the one who can choose which impulses to act on and which to let pass. That awareness becomes your anchor in a chaotic world, and the world will remain chaotic. Public debates will grow intense. Social media will amplify outrage. Workplaces will contain politics. Families will carry old patterns. Friendships will test loyalty. None of these realities disappear simply because you understand human psychology, but your participation changes. Instead of being pulled into every emotional storm, you evaluate whether engagement is necessary. Instead of reacting to every provocation, you consider the long-term cost. Instead of seeking validation from unstable sources, you ground yourself in values that do not shift with trends. There is also a deeper compassion that develops, not sentimental compassion, but informed compassion. You begin to notice how fragile identity can be, how much of human behavior is an attempt to protect self-worth, how even arrogance is often a shield, how hostility can hide humiliation. This does not excuse harmful actions, but it allows you to see pain beneath performance, and seeing pain changes your tone. You become firmer without cruelty, clearer without aggression, assertive without domination. You do not need to humiliate someone to correct them. You do not need to expose someone's weakness to prove your strength. True strength, you realize, is controlled power. There is also acceptance, the acceptance that you cannot save everyone from their own unconscious patterns. Some people will resist growth. Some will cling to victimhood. Some will chase status endlessly. Some will remain trapped in cycles of comparison and insecurity. You cannot force awareness onto anyone, but you can embody it, and that embodiment quietly influences more than lectures ever could. When you remain calm under pressure, others notice. When you admit fault openly, others feel safer doing the same. When you refuse to engage in gossip or petty rivalry, the social environment subtly shifts. Influence at this level is not loud. It is steady. You also begin to value solitude differently, not as escape, but as recalibration. Time alone becomes an opportunity to examine your own patterns without distraction, to ask whether you are drifting back into old habits, to adjust your internal compass. Without reflection, awareness fades. With reflection, it sharpens. Perhaps the most profound understanding that emerges is this: human nature is neither purely dark nor purely noble. It contains both potential for destruction and capacity for extraordinary growth. The same drives that produce envy can produce ambition. The same pride that fuels arrogance can fuel resilience. The same desire for belonging that creates conformity can create community. The raw material is neutral. Direction determines outcome. And direction is chosen in small, almost invisible decisions. In the pause before speaking. In the restraint before reacting. In the courage to question your certainty. In the humility to apologize. In the discipline to continue improving long after applause fades. These decisions compound quietly over years. Eventually, what began as an effort to understand others becomes a lifelong practice of shaping your own character. You stop asking, "Why are people like this?" and start asking, "How will I respond?" That shift places power back where it belongs. Not in controlling the world. Not in manipulating perception. Not in winning every status game, but in mastering your internal responses so thoroughly that external chaos loses much of its grip. And when you live this way consistently, something unexpected happens. Peace becomes less dependent on circumstances. Confidence becomes less dependent on praise. Influence becomes less dependent on force. You are still human. You still feel. You still desire. You still struggle at times. But you are no longer unconscious. You see the currents beneath behavior. You recognize the patterns within yourself. You move deliberately instead of impulsively. And in a world where most people are still reacting without awareness, that alone makes you rare. That is the enduring value of understanding human nature. Not dominance, not manipulation, but clarity, balance, responsibility, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing yourself deeply enough to guide your own actions, no matter the environment you find yourself in. There is one last truth that quietly settles in after everything else: self-knowledge is not comfortable, but it is freeing. When you first begin examining human nature, it can feel unsettling. You notice how much of behavior is driven by ego. You see how often insecurity shapes decisions. You recognize how easily groups distort judgment. And for a moment, the world may seem more fragile than you thought. But if you stay with the process, something stabilizes inside you. You realize that fragility does not mean hopelessness. It means awareness is necessary. Most suffering in human relationships does not come from evil intent. It comes from blindness. From people who do not understand their own motives. From unchecked pride. From fear disguised as anger. From comparison disguised as ambition. When you see this clearly, you stop personalizing everything. Not every criticism is an attack. Not every silence is rejection. Not every disagreement is disrespect. And not every success around you is a threat. This clarity removes a heavy psychological burden. You stop carrying imaginary battles. You stop defending yourself against shadows. You respond to reality instead of assumption. At the same time, you begin to hold yourself to a higher internal standard. Because once you understand how destructive unconscious behavior can be, you no longer want to contribute to it. You notice when your words are about to wound unnecessarily. You catch when your tone carries subtle superiority. You feel when pride is pushing you to speak simply to win. And you choose differently. This is the quiet discipline that shapes character over decades. Character is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary interactions, in how you respond when interrupted, when corrected, when overlooked, when praised. Each of these moments offers two paths, ego or awareness. Choosing awareness repeatedly rewires your internal world. You begin to experience less internal conflict. There is less need to defend, less need to compare, less need to prove. You conserve energy, and that energy becomes available for creation, contribution, and depth. Another subtle shift happens in how you view time. Earlier in life, many decisions are urgent. You want recognition now, validation now, victory now. But with maturity, you begin thinking in longer horizons. You see that reputation compounds, trust compounds, skill compounds, emotional control compounds. So does impulsiveness. So does arrogance. So does resentment. You become more careful about what you allow to compound inside you. There is also a different relationship with power. Power no longer feels like domination. It feels like responsibility. The more influence you gain, in business, in family, in community, the more aware you become of your psychological impact. A single careless reaction can ripple outward. A single calm decision can stabilize others. Power tests emotional maturity constantly. If your ego is still hungry, power feeds it. If your identity depends on control, power magnifies insecurity. But if you have cultivated self-awareness, power becomes a tool for stability rather than chaos. This is why inner work must precede outer authority. You also develop a deeper tolerance for complexity. You stop forcing people into simple categories of good and bad. You see contradictions. Someone can be generous in one context and selfish in another, strong in one area and fragile in another. You include yourself in this understanding. This prevents the harsh self-judgment that often leads to discouragement. Growth becomes iterative rather than dramatic. You expect imperfection, but you do not excuse stagnation. Perhaps the most liberating realization of all is that you are not obligated to participate in every emotional invitation. Someone provokes you, you do not have to respond. Someone competes unnecessarily, you do not have to engage. Someone gossips, you do not have to contribute. You begin choosing your battles with precision. Silence becomes strategic, not weak. Calm becomes intentional, not passive. Distance becomes protection, not avoidance. And with these choices, your life becomes less crowded with unnecessary conflict. At a deeper level, you begin to respect the difficulty of being human. It is not easy to carry identity, ambition, fear, desire, and social pressure all at once. Everyone is balancing these forces imperfectly. That recognition softens you without making you soft. You remain strong in boundaries, clear in communication, disciplined in ambition, but you are no longer hardened by constant judgment. In the end, the laws governing human nature are not external commandments. They are patterns that operate whether you notice them or not. The difference is whether you are unconscious inside those patterns or conscious within them. Conscious living does not eliminate struggle. It refines it. It transforms conflict into insight. It transforms comparison into direction. It transforms ego into awareness. And when you live that way consistently, something remarkable happens. You become someone others feel steady around. Someone who does not escalate tension unnecessarily. Someone who can hold disagreement without hostility. Someone who can succeed without arrogance. Someone who can fail without collapse. That steadiness is rare, and it is earned, not through dominance, not through image, but through years of honest self-examination and disciplined response. In the final analysis, mastering human nature is not about changing the world overnight. It is about refusing to let unconscious forces dictate your character. It is about choosing clarity over impulse, responsibility over blame, depth over performance. And in that choice, repeated daily, you find a form of strength that cannot be easily shaken, because it is built from within. As everything settles, one final understanding begins to crystallize. The ultimate goal was never to outsmart human nature, but to align with reality instead of fighting it. So much frustration in life comes from expecting people to behave differently than they are wired to behave. We expect constant rationality from emotional creatures. We expect humility from fragile egos. We expect loyalty from those driven by self-interest. And when reality contradicts these expectations, we feel betrayed. But once you understand the deeper patterns of human behavior, your expectations become sharper, more grounded. You no longer expect people to be free of ego, you expect ego to show up. You no longer expect envy to disappear, you anticipate it around success. You no longer assume groups will think independently, you recognize the pull of conformity. You do not become pessimistic, you become realistic. Realism is stabilizing. When you expect friction, you prepare for it calmly. When you anticipate insecurity, you avoid triggering it unnecessarily. When you sense competition, you navigate it strategically rather than emotionally. Life becomes less surprising in a negative way because you are no longer naive about the forces at play. At the same time, realism protects you from self-deception. You understand that your own motives are rarely pure. When you feel generous, there may still be a desire for appreciation underneath. When you feel angry, pride may be mixed with legitimate concern. When you feel righteous, ego may be hiding in the background. This does not make your intentions meaningless. It makes them layered. And by accepting those layers, you prevent hypocrisy. You are less likely to judge others harshly for flaws you quietly carry yourself. You develop intellectual honesty, the ability to admit complexity without losing direction. Another shift happens in how you relate to ambition and legacy. Instead of chasing visibility for its own sake, you begin focusing on substance. Instead of trying to appear impressive, you aim to become competent. Instead of reacting to every challenge, you think in decades rather than days. You recognize that reputations are fragile, but character is durable. Image fluctuates, character compounds. This perspective also changes how you handle setbacks. Earlier in life, failure may have felt like identity damage. Now, it feels like data, information about gaps, miscalculations, or timing. You do not collapse under it because you are not equating performance with worth. Emotional resilience grows from this separation. There is also a deeper appreciation for restraint. In a world that rewards loud opinions and constant reaction, restraint feels almost rebellious. Choosing not to escalate, choosing not to retaliate, choosing not to respond immediately. These are acts of control that strengthen you internally, even if they go unnoticed externally. Restraint prevents regret. Many long-term consequences in life are born from short-term impulses, a reckless statement, an ego-driven decision, and unnecessary conflict. When you train yourself to slow down, you eliminate countless avoidable problems before they begin. This discipline does not weaken your presence, it sharpens it. When you do speak, your words carry weight because they are not impulsive. Over time, you also notice a shift in your emotional baseline. There is less volatility, fewer dramatic highs and lows, more quiet consistency. This does not mean life becomes dull. It means your internal state is less dependent on external chaos. Stability becomes your default. And from stability, better decisions emerge. You become more selective about who you trust, but not closed off. More ambitious, but less frantic. More confident, but less arrogant. More empathetic, but less easily manipulated. Perhaps the most profound transformation is this: you stop trying to fix people. You can guide, you can advise, you can model awareness. But you understand that growth cannot be forced. Each person must confront their own ego, their own insecurity, their own blind spots. You release the illusion of control over others' development. That release frees enormous mental energy. Instead of managing everyone else's psychology, you manage your own. Instead of resenting predictable flaws, you design your life around realistic expectations. Instead of hoping human nature will evolve overnight, you strengthen your ability to navigate it intelligently. In the end, the laws governing human behavior are not cynical observations. They are practical insights. They teach you where conflict originates, where manipulation hides, where insecurity distorts perception, where ambition becomes toxic. But they also show you where growth is possible. Self-awareness can interrupt ego, humility can soften power, purpose can redirect envy, discipline can restrain impulse, empathy can neutralize hostility. You cannot eliminate the darker aspects of human nature, but you can elevate your response to them. And that is where real strength lies, not in dominance, not in image, not in constant victory, but in composure under pressure, in clarity amid confusion, in responsibility when it would be easier to blame, in measured action when impulse demands speed. When you live this way long enough, it stops feeling like effort. It becomes identity. You become someone who thinks before reacting, who questions before assuming, who listens before judging. Someone who understands that beneath every interaction is a complex web of emotion, history, and hidden motive, including your own. And with that understanding, you walk through life not as a victim of human nature, and not as a manipulator of it, but as a conscious participant within it. That is the quiet mastery at the heart of it all. In the very end, after all the analysis and reflection, one quiet conclusion remains: the real battlefield was never outside you, it was always within. Every insult that lingered in your mind longer than it should have, every rivalry that consumed more energy than it deserved, every moment of envy, pride, defensiveness, or silent resentment, these were not random experiences. They were invitations. Invitations to either remain unconscious or to grow. Most people never accept that invitation. They move through life reacting automatically, blaming externally, repeating patterns internally. Years pass, and the same conflicts reappear in different forms. Different faces, same dynamics. Different environments, same emotional triggers. But once you understand the deeper mechanics of human behavior, repetition becomes optional. You start seeing your life as a mirror. If the same type of conflict keeps showing up, you look inward before pointing outward. If you constantly feel disrespected, you examine whether insecurity is magnifying neutral events. If you repeatedly attract competitive tension, you reflect on how you present success or status. This self-inquiry does not mean you assume fault for everything. It means you assume responsibility for your side of the equation. Responsibility is power. When you own your reactions, no one else fully controls your state. When you regulate your ego, others cannot easily provoke you. When you are aware of your insecurities, they cannot be used against you as leverage. That is freedom at its most practical level. You also begin to understand something else. Most people are far more predictable than they appear. The insecure will seek validation. The status-driven will compare constantly. The power-hungry will test boundaries. The emotionally immature will avoid accountability. Once you recognize these patterns, you stop being shocked by them. And when you are no longer shocked, you are calmer. Calmness changes outcomes. In negotiations, it gives you leverage. In conflict, it gives you clarity. In leadership, it builds trust. In relationships, it creates safety. Calmness is not passivity. It is controlled strength. There is also a deeper shift in how you experience yourself. Earlier, you may have been defined by roles: the achiever, the rebel, the caretaker, the competitor. But now you see those roles as flexible. You are not locked into a single identity. You can adapt without losing integrity. This flexibility is powerful in a changing world. Environments shift. Industries evolve. Social norms transform. Those who cling rigidly to old identities often struggle. Those who understand their core values but adjust their methods thrive. You become less attached to proving yourself and more focused on improving yourself. And with that shift, comparison loses much of its grip. Comparison is one of the most exhausting habits of the human mind. It fuels envy, insecurity, and endless dissatisfaction. But once you understand that status is relative and never permanently secure, the game becomes less compelling. You can still aim high, you can still build, compete, and achieve, but your sense of worth no longer rises and falls with someone else's progress. That internal independence is rare. It also makes you harder to manipulate through praise or fear. When your identity is not fragile, you cannot be easily inflated or deflated. You remain proportionate. Over time, this proportion becomes your natural state. You celebrate success without arrogance. You accept criticism without collapse. You acknowledge flaws without shame. You recognize strengths without exaggeration. Balance replaces extremes. And from balance comes clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you value. Clarity about which battles deserve your energy and which do not. You stop trying to win every argument. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop defending every misunderstanding. You choose carefully. This selective engagement preserves mental energy, energy that can now be directed toward long-term creation rather than short-term reaction. Perhaps the most meaningful realization of all is that understanding human nature increases compassion, not cynicism. When you see how deeply fear, insecurity, and the need for significance drive behavior, you become less quick to hate. You still maintain standards. You still protect boundaries, but you do not dehumanize. You understand that the same forces you work daily to manage within yourself are operating in everyone else, and that understanding humbles you. In the end, the laws governing human nature are not meant to make you calculating or cold. They are meant to wake you up, to show you that beneath every social structure, every ambition, every rivalry, every alliance, there are timeless emotional forces at work. You cannot escape those forces. but you can become conscious of them. And consciousness is the dividing line. On one side are those who react without awareness, who repeat patterns unconsciously, who are ruled by ego and impulse. On the other side are those who observe themselves, regulate their responses, and move deliberately. The difference between those two lives is enormous. One feels chaotic and reactive, the other feels grounded and intentional. And that is where this entire journey leads, not to dominance over others, not to flawless behavior, but to deliberate living, to walking into every room aware of the invisible dynamics, to speaking with consideration of emotional impact, to pursuing ambition without losing integrity, to holding power without abusing it, to remaining human, flawed, emotional, ambitious, but conscious, because in the end, the greatest advantage you can ever possess is not wealth, not status, not influence. It is self-mastery. And self-mastery begins the moment you decide to look honestly at your own nature, and continue looking, every single day.